Hello, U.S. history. Okay, so this is the last lesson for this week, and it is going to focus on the U.S. Constitution. Okay, what exactly is in this document? Now, from the first two lessons that we had, the first lesson dealt with our first attempt at a national government after the American Revolution, the Articles of Confederation. Okay, and we talked about how weak they were. The government that it sets up has a very weak legislature. The states have all the power. There's a very weak national government. In that national government, there's a very weak legislature, and there's an extremely weak executive and judicial branch. In fact, they're almost non-existent. Okay, and episodes like the Shays Rebellion prove that the articles are weak. So James Madison calls for this new meeting to discuss the articles, and people show up. I'm going to say people show up thinking they're just going to talk about amending the articles or changing the articles, although a few show up and say, look, we need something completely different. And within 5 days, it becomes apparent we cannot fix the articles. So we create this new document, the Constitution. And we compromise on a couple issues between the big states and the small states. We have a bicameral legislature, which means two houses, Congress with the House of Representatives, where population is going to be used to determine representation. That makes the big states happy because the bigger your population, the more representatives you get. And then you're going to have the Senate, where we have equal representation, 2 senators per state, which makes the small states happy because everybody's equal in the Senate. Okay. To appease the South, we're going to come up with the three-fifths compromise, where slaves will count as three-fifths of a person for representation purposes, but that does not mean that they can vote or that their interests are even going to be protected by this new government. Okay. And of course, there's other things that we're going to discuss, and there's other things that we're going to work out. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because now it's September 1787. This document, the U.S. Constitution, has been approved by the Constitutional Convention. And now it's got to go to the states to be discussed. And we need 9 out of 13 states to approve this document for it to go into effect and become the law of the land. Okay. And there are going to be strong arguments for and against this document. All right. But before we get into that, let's talk about the document itself. Now, remember, James Madison is considered the father of the Constitution. He does a lot of the writing in this document. Okay, he came up with the Virginia Plan. He writes the Bill of Rights. To be honest with you, he had roles in writing the Virginia Constitution as well. So he's had experience writing documents like this. All right, so this is kind of his baby. All right, so exactly what is in the Constitution? Well, the Constitution has three main parts. The first part is the preamble. The preamble states why the Constitution is written, its purposes. All right. And the preamble starts with a very important statement: we the people. Okay. Not we the state of Virginia, or we the state of Massachusetts, or we the southern states, or we the larger states. We the people. It's everybody. Okay. We, the people of the United States. Why are we doing this? In order to form a more perfect union. Do hereby establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, which is peace, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare, to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, which means our children. Okay? Do hereby establish this Constitution of the United States. All right. So the preamble states why we're doing this, the purposes, and it states that we are in this together. We are one. Okay. And we want the government to be able to do these things in order to protect us. All right. This goes back to what we're talking about with Locke, okay? This idea of a social contract, the people are going to give up some of their power to a government in order for the government to protect them. This is what we want our government to do: establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. And we make it clearly stated that the government can only do that because we, the people, have the power to create a government that does this. Okay, so that's part number one. The preamble states why the Constitution is written, the purposes. Part number two are the articles. Okay, the articles explain how the government will work. And there are 7 articles. And those 7 articles are basically broken down into 3 topics. Number one, it explains the branches of government. There will be 3 branches of government: executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. And it lays out what each one of those branches can and cannot do. Okay. And to be honest with you, each branch gets its own article. Okay. Then there are a couple articles that deal with the amendment process. How are we going to change this document? The founding fathers know that there are going to be issues down the road that they haven't thought of, that we as a country are going to have to deal with. Okay, so how can we create a document that allows us to change it as we see fit and as we need to? All right, that's what the amendment process is all about. So amendment means change. Okay, so how can we change this document to meet the needs that we haven't even thought of before? Okay, or maybe they're needs that we are concerned about, but we don't want to deal with them right now, like slavery. But we know later down the road we are going to have to deal with them. We want to get this government off the ground and moving. So let's focus on that first. And speaking of getting this government off the ground and moving, the last part of the articles explains the ratification process. Namely, we're going to send it to the states and we're going to send it to the people. And we need 9 out of 13 states to approve this before it goes into effect. Okay? So part number 1 is the preamble. Why are we doing this? Part number 2 is the articles. How are we going to do this? What's it going to look like? What's the government going to look like? 3 branches. How are they going to work? And then last but not least, part number 3 are those amendments, those rights and changes to the Constitution. Now, the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. We're going to talk more about this at the end of this unit, okay? If not next week, the week after, okay? So the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights. Amendments 11 to 27 are later changes, okay? And that's it. There's only been 27 times that we as a country have felt the need to change the Constitution, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I think the Constitution is a beautiful document, all right? It is powerful in its simplicity. I mean, you think about it, there's only 3 parts to it, okay? Our founding fathers were smart enough to write it in a way where it's eloquent, but it's concise. They were smart enough to create an amendment process, okay? But we've only had to use that amendment process 27 times in the 200 plus years that this document has been around, okay? I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful document. It's a very, very flexible document. I had a seminar this summer just about the Constitution, and I really came out appreciating the Constitution more. And I don't think there's any surprise that we have the longest standing Constitution of any government, any democratic government in the world. Okay? Ours is still in existence without any major changes. I mean, we got the amendment process, but that was what they were there for. And I had a professor in college, that would talk about there's 2 ways to look at this, okay? Number 1, the founding fathers did a good job. If we've only felt the need to change it 27 times, then they must have done a good job writing it to begin with, okay? On the other hand, he would argue that if the founding fathers came back today and saw that there were 27 changes, they'd be upset. Not because we had to change it 27 times, but because they thought there should be more. okay, that we would encounter more issues down the road than just 27. All right. That they would kind of be surprised that there aren't more changes to it. All right. So as we move forward, just realize, in my personal opinion, this is a beautiful, beautiful document. It is well thought out. It is easy to understand. Okay. Okay. I mean, really, three parts to it. They explain the powers of the branches. They explain why we're doing and everything like that. I mean, compared to some other documents, I know it's difficult language for us today, and it's not fun if you have to read it. Okay. But it's supposed to be easy to understand. And we can still change it, but we've only changed it 27 times. Okay. So this is a wonderful, wonderful document. Now, what is in this document? We know there are three parts. What are in these three parts? What are some of the key principles embedded in the Constitution? All right. Well, one is this idea of popular sovereignty. It begins with the preamble, we the people. The power is with the people. Okay. That statement right off the bat, we the people. Okay. Now we're forming a government, but where does that government get its power? It gets its power from us, which, like I said, goes back to this idea of a social contract. We give up some of our power to form a government, and we expect the government to protect us in return. Okay. And that's what we're stating here in the preamble. We, the people, are forming this government. Okay. And we expect it to do these things. Along with that comes the idea of limited government. If the people have power, the government can only do what we want it to do, and it can only do what is written down. All right. Some of you are in my practical law class, and we've talked about constitutional laws and stuff like that. And if you want to get something labeled unconstitutional real quick, if it goes against anything that is written down, it is unconstitutional. And if it goes against anything that is written down in the Constitution, that is a violation of the limited power of government. Okay? It can only do what is written down. We, the people, still have the power. Okay? And government can only do what is written down in the document. Federalism. We've talked about federalism. This is the division of power between the national government and the state governments. Okay? So there's like two sides of the coin. One side is going to the national government, the other side is going to the state government. And this is one of those principles that we talk about. Everybody was worried about the national government having too much power. Well, if we're going to split power, not only between the branches of the national government, but between the national government and the state governments, this is supposed to help calm some of those fears that our national government is going to become too powerful and trample our rights. Okay? No, it can't do that, because government power is going to be divided between the national government and state governments. That's what federalism is. Okay. Then, of course, we've got separation of powers. There are three branches. Each branch has its own responsibilities. Okay. And real quickly, the executive branch, which is the president and his cabinet, its job is to enforce the laws. The legislative branch, which is Congress, those two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate, their job is to make the laws. And the judicial branch, which is the court system, including the Supreme Court, its job is to interpret the law. Okay? So each branch has its own set of responsibilities in terms of the law. Executive branch enforces, legislative branch makes, and judicial branch interprets. Then, within the separation of powers, okay, comes the idea. And there's our little diagram right there. You can see three separate branches. And notice they're supposed to be equal. Okay. And people have differing perceptions of that, but they are supposed to be equal. Then, to make sure that each one of those branches is doing what it's supposed to be doing, there exist checks and balances between each branch. That way, no one branch is more powerful than the other. Each branch checks on the others, and that maintains a balance of power. And of course, you got to think of a triangle there with the executive, legislative, and judicial. Each one of those, and it's an equilateral triangle. Each one of those branches is an angle on the equilateral triangle. And then the checks and balances connect the two or connect the three. Okay. The legislative branch can impeach an executive and override a veto. Okay. It can also impeach a judge and confirm appointments of judges. All right. The executive veto bill. So the legislative branch makes the bill. It's got to go to the president to be signed. If the president has a problem with it, it can send it back to the legislature. If the legislature says, no, we really like this bill and we put a lot of thought into it, it can override the president's veto. Okay. Now, usually before he just flat out vetoes it, the president will say, here are some suggestions. What do you think about this? Okay. And if the president does something wrong, the legislative branch can impeach them. When it comes to the judicial branch, the executive branch appoints the judges. Now, those judges have to be approved by the legislature, okay? But they are appointed by the executive, all right? And by the way, if the judicial branch does something wrong as well, the legislative branch can impeach them as well, okay? The judicial branch declares laws unconstitutional that are passed by the legislature and can declare actions by the executive to be unconstitutional, okay? So the idea here is each branch is working together to control the others so that nobody is too powerful and we maintain that balance of power and we maintain that separation of powers. In fact, the judicial power to declare things unconstitutional is its greatest power in the Constitution, and we call that judicial review. That's the power of the Supreme Court to declare a law or action of Congress or the president unconstitutional. That is its greatest power. Okay, it's number one check and balance. Now, that's the document. In a nutshell, that's the document that is going to get sent to the states to be ratified. And that's where we're going to pick up next week by talking about these arguments for and against ratification. Okay, so that's the document. Where we're headed is, can we get 9 out of 13 states to approve it? And will it become the law of the land? Spoiler alert, it does.